Today, I'm your host, Niloy Ranjan Biswas, and I have an excellent scholar on this matter, Professor Amena Mohsin. Professor Amena Mohsin was a professor of international relations from the University of Dhaka, and I'm always blessed to say that my direct professor at the university. I've learned a lot from Professor Amena Mohsin. In today's conversation, we'll basically explore a very interesting and significant part of Bangladesh's foreign policy. That is basically how we in Bangladesh have accommodated and also faced challenges, but tried to overcome the issues of inclusion in the foreign policies and inclusions particularly of the women and the young and the youth in Bangladesh's foreign policy. Professor Mohsin is not only an expert on this particular issue, she has vast knowledge on particularly when we're talking about women's rights, inclusion of women and others in issues of foreign policy and Bangladesh's role in international affairs. Welcome, Professor Mohsin. How are you?
Thank you very much. I'm well, good. How are you, Dr. Niloy?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
And thank you very much for your kind words.
It's a pleasure always, madam. So, ma'am, can you suggest that we often learn about feminist foreign policy, and is this just a conceptual idea, or we can also have a very this is also implementable from the Western experiences and how we have implemented it in the global South, or particularly in the context of Bangladesh.
Thank you so much, Dr. Niloy. See, the very idea of having a feminist foreign policy, if one talks about it, it is based on the equality of women. And in terms of not only their rights, but also justice. So essentially, it is an idea or a concept that allows you to accommodate or move towards a much more strategic human security strategy. That is it.
Right.
I mean, if I can put it in a nutshell, in a very short way. But there are major challenges. Well, since you mentioned about the Western countries, like we can talk about Sweden, we can talk about Mexico. They are known to have feminist foreign policies. But there are problem areas because because you are talking about, when we talk about feminist foreign policy, it is and when I talk about how you take it as a strategic outlook, okay, in foreign policy. And when we talk, and it is not only about women's, it essentially, at the center of it is women's right, but it also encompasses security, the idea of security. And there, I think the major challenge comes for countries of the South. And let me make it very clear that when I talk about South, I do believe that it is a very disaggregated South. And we have differences amongst us. So even if you look at the North, that is also a disaggregated North. And
Right.
we have different kinds of states with different, maybe they have commonalities in some areas, but also differences. But Sweden having joined NATO, I mean, then one has to understand that what NATO entails. And when we talk about uh, embedding women peace and security, youth peace and security, like then the issue comes that how do you conceptualize peace? How do you conceptualize security? I'm talking about the southern countries and also Bangladesh in particular. So we have to look at it in a very intersectional manner. We have to unpack the concept. I guess I've talked a little bit about the challenges as well. But it is an important concept. And I think at the normative level, it is very important that we keep it, because then it, gives you certain vision, some ideals which are much more human centric and gives us the space,
Exactly.
the cognitive space to move forward towards certain ideals.
Exactly. No, thank you so much. I think, I'm aware that you have been working on these, for example, the inclusion, the status of women, peace and security, particularly derived from the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, and also the Youth Peace and Security, that how Bangladesh can accommodate and not only comply with the international standards, but also contextualize what challenges we have in our own context. What changes have you observed over the last 2-3 decades in terms of the inclusivity in the foreign policies, if I may put it in that way?
Well, I guess if you would have asked a practitioner of foreign policy or an ambassador, the answer would be marginal and minimal. But for me as an academic, I think I look at it as quite remarkable because as as students of international relations, I think in one of my first writings on women in international security, the first question I raised was that where are the women in international security? But you do see the women in international security these days, and you do see women in the parlance of foreign policy. In the even if we talk about Bangladesh, like Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we do see women occupying ambassadorial positions, which they have earned. It's not that it has been given to them.
Absolutely.
So we have had very successful women ambassadors at the highest level. At the UN, they have represented us. So there, I would say that in terms of foreign policy, and women do make a difference, in decision making. Like we always talk about climate change, climate diplomacy, migration diplomacy. These are women empowerment here. These are areas where Bangladesh has made remarkable strides. But in other cases, also in UN peacekeeping, it's not only about numbers of it, that the number of women have increased, but also I think when you have women in the peacekeeping forces, from the women who have gone into the field, they have told me that how women in those affected region felt more comfortable talking to the women who were there as peacekeepers.
Exactly.
So I guess, like for me, from where we started off, we have made remarkable progress. And it might not be, if you ask me to put it on a scale of 1 to 10, I wouldn't say that we have achieved an A category, but I would say we are B plus
B plus.
there, because at least in the at the normative realm, or in the we do acknowledge it, and once you acknowledge it, that it is important for us.
Exactly.
We have adopted the national action plan also.
Exactly.
So once you accept it, then you start implementing it.
Exactly.
And the challenges are there.
Right.
But but I'm hopeful for Bangladesh, because given the demographic dividend, and women being 50% of the population,
Exactly.
and and youth being almost 48% of the population, the pressure is automatically created. And Bangladesh also has a long history of women's movement.
Exactly.
And a very rich histories, and it's likewise it's the same for youth movements. We have seen X number, all the major political developments and major shifts in the political landscape of Bangladesh right from 71, pre-71 also I talk about, starting from 1948 with the language movement. These have been youth-driven movements. Political parties joined in, but essentially these were youth-driven movements. So we cannot undermine those factors.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, can we discuss about some of the structural issue? For example, we know about foreign policy decision making is sometimes very hierarchical, and where we see seniorities is an important issue. Countries represent in the global platforms where we see senior ambassadors, and the issues for countries like us. I mean, this is a question as also of the policy autonomy. Has we been able to champion our own national interests or agenda? Number one. Number two is, as I was saying, it's a very hierarchical domain in itself, the foreign policy decision making. where intersectional hierarchies, seniorities, male dominations, age-old expertise matter sometimes. We often see that. So young people and women, what structural challenges do they face in the context of Bangladesh? What is your opinion on that?
See, when you talk about structural problems are not only at the international or global level, they are also at the domestic level,
Right.
right?
Right.
So I do believe that, once you have the national action plan and one has to look at it at short term, medium term and long term. Maybe I would take certain things, a perfect balancing system as a long term strategy, but as a short term and medium term, I would say that, we are moving towards towards youth representation, at least. If you look at how the youth have come out, and they are in fact holding very important critical positions. Even in in the case of, the name is not coming to me, if the person who is aspiring to be the mayor of New York, Mahmoud Mamdani's
Mamdani is, yeah,
Yes.
Mr. Mamdani, right? I
Yes.
also forgot the first name, but
Yes,
exactly, right.
yes,
Yeah.
Mr. Mamdani.
Right.
So he's only in his 30s, right?
Exactly.
So youth, and I can call it I can categorize him within the youth category. So if you
course.
talk about the structural barriers, one do see the youths coming up, and even in Bangladesh, we are seeing that youth leadership at the political level is also coming up, and youth are voicing their voices. Okay, and they are these are critical factors. Whether those are factored in or not, that is another issue. But we have seen, head of states or head of governments in the age realm of 40s.
Exactly.
So young people are coming up. This hierarchy is breaking down. I mean, if you talk about age hierarchy, that is breaking down. In terms of structural barriers, because Bangladesh is a very
Right.
traditional society. So of course there are and we have personal laws. We have to accept that. So that is a major barrier. But I do think that, once you start implementing the National Action Plan as a strategy and address the issues of women's, at least in the economic realm, political realm, if you give them equality, what we call practical gender needs.
Right.
Ultimately, it would lead towards the meeting of what we call strategic gender needs, where these barriers would also be broken. So I would, yes, the barriers are there, the challenges are there, but I think the ceiling, at least particularly in this part of the world, I find that we have been able to make a breach in the ceiling, if not break it.
Right. Thank you so much, madam. You have been referring to the formulation of the National Action Plan, which is a national instrument for the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, Women, Peace and Security. We have not been yet able to have a national action plan for YPS, but I guess that from all the other national instruments that we have has a strong point regarding the role of the young people in particularly peace and security and broadly foreign policy. But there are also another story that over the years, there are challenges that has probably created barriers for the implementation of the National Action Plan. There is another story well, its formulation has been participatory, but in terms of implementation, has all the sectors been accommodated for, particularly the women-led NGOs that we are talking about, as considering the fact that we have a history, as you also mentioned, we have a history of women's movement, women-led organizations, and so on and so forth. Or is it only confined between the national or the state-based agencies like armed forces, police forces, secretariats, and all that? So, do you think that we still need to work hard to be more inclusive in this regard to implement the National Action Plan?
Well, Dr. Niloy, you pointed about his story. We have her stories also.
Right.
X number of her stories, okay? So I think that is very critical. Yes, I agree with you that we have many more, we have miles to go. We have miles to walk. it's still a far cry. And in terms of YPS, we have not adopted a national action plan as yet, but I do hope that in future it would be, it is something that would be taken up. And I'm grateful to you and FES that they have, chosen this as a topic, because people hardly know about YPS, right? Peace and security. We do not talk about it. These are not the issues which are widely disseminated. Though we have talked a lot about women, peace and security, but yes, I feel that at the moment it is very much top driven and confined to military institutions, maybe in the corridors of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and certain it's quite donor driven at the moment. But the Bangladesh must overcome this thing, and it is something, it has to be contextualized and localized. And that's why one of the suggestions that I make very strongly is that we need to involve the local government in it, because if you want to localize it, one needs to have a bottom up approach for it, or the top down is important for decision making and policy making, but if it is bottom up, I mean, that makes it much more important. And if you have, like we have the local government system where women representation is there, okay, so if that is there, and another thing is that sensitizing the men. It's not only that one, we keep on talking about women's rights and women's empowerment, but it is, and somehow the men feel very threatened about it. So it's not that one is disempowering the other, the other biological sex. It's not like that at all. I mean, we have to, it is something collective. One has to look at collective empowerment. So that is very important for us. And we also need that gender sensitization at different levels, not only in the military, but also, I mean, which is still looked upon as a very masculine institution. So we have to sensitize them. We have to sensitize the our cadres in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and civil service. That is very important, and also parliamentarians in the true sense of the word. And I understand when you say that there are challenges, barriers. One do see that some political parties, they have raised their objections, but I think they have raised their objections which is not something one is surprised at, because there are certain as I said, that there are domestic barriers and we are traditional societies, but I do believe that once spaces are created, one can at least open up negotiations and dialogues with them, and and take it as a long-term strategy.
Exactly. Thank you so much, because we are doing this discussion on the basis of what are the significant, but sometimes also identified as the soft issues in the foreign policy. Nevertheless, they are very significant because these changes the course and bring the normative side of the foreign policy affairs. And as you mentioned, and thanks to Federica but Stiftung, that we have been doing this discussion and on many other issues of Bangladesh's strength in the softer side and promote as the normative part of the foreign relations. But if we consider also the global scenario, because we have been discussing about structural barriers mostly from the domestic context, national context, but globally what we are experiencing at this moment, at the one hand we have these value-laden, value-based ideals of foreign policies where we consider WPS and YPS issues are important. We talk about feminist foreign policies and so on and so forth. But at the same time, we see that investment in the conflicts have been increasing over the last couple of decades. And there are wars, there are conflicts, there are different kinds of gray zones in the conflicts, and the conflict resolution processes are continuously impeded because the engagement of the global powers have made things more complicated. So conflict resolutions than many other times in history is more complicated at this moment. Well, we are talking these issues in a time when we have just experienced the Middle East peace processes. But if you again look at the panels who were standing over there, how many were there actually have played a very critical role who were women or from other gender or very young in nature? Right. So still we see that very conventional picture of the global leaderships who are engaged in the mediation processes to make this happen. But probably at the ground level, there are different scenarios out there, or inclusion of women or young people in the peace process. So do you see prospects? Because my concern is that still the major investment in the world is actually for the conflict. But we are also talking about peace, and foreign policy that invests in peace must have this kind of changes in their own foreign policies. But considering the entire global situation, what is your point of optimism there?
See, my point of optimism, I would say, uh, yes, I do agree with you that it's a, I mean, one is, it's almost like going back to a very ultra right world where very ultra right forces are taking over the military industrial complex is hardening up. We do see these things, but at the same time, we do see strong challenges to those. I mean, since you mentioned about the Middle East peace process, look at the way the European countries have recognized Palestine.
Remarkable, right?
So it is remarkable. I mean, this is for the first time. It is a major departure. I mean, and United States and Israel almost were isolated in the United Nations. So we do see this, and you see the way. I mean, flotilla. One of our photographers, Shahidul Alam, was also there. He was kidnapped later on. I mean, with intervention, he was sent back. So we do see, and the people's voices and how people come around and they unite. Those are, and even in Israel, we see protests emerging.
Right.
So these are, and if you look at the media, even the mainstream medias, I mean, they have stepped back and they are talking about peace dialogues, peace issues. Yes, it is important, to involve youth and women in the peace processes. It is very important. I mean, I think it is just because of situations like this that it makes it much more important for us to talk about,
Exactly.
WPS and YPS. And on another note, when you talk about the softer issues in IR, international relations and foreign policy, somehow, like my position had always been very different on this. And I have always maintained that if you bring in this private public dichotomy and this soft and hard binaries, then you somehow fall into the trap
Right.
of privileging one over the other.
Right.
And language and concepts are very important, Dr. Niloy. You know it.
Absolutely.
You are a student of international relations. And I think the less we or talk about the binaries and don't and the less we use these categories, the better it is for us, because after all these are issues of human security
Exactly.
and people's security. And when I started off by saying that these are very critical issues, in fact, what we term as national interest, those are actually people's interest in the name of I mean, if you bring in the entire concept of nation, national, this is people-centric, human-centric. So these binaries between state, nation, people, these are created by the state, and they have specific interests there. So I think as academics, as scholars, and as policymakers, it is the responsibility is on us to break through these dichotomies and bring up these issues as the core challenges and the core issues for the survival of humanity. I have always maintained that we are going through a crisis of humanity at this point of time.
Thank you so much. And that's very important. We are almost at the end of the conversation, and I've been enjoying, as I have always been, enjoying your conversation with you, particularly in the last 2 decades or more. But I think, it's more suggestive. Like, I'd like you to suggest one thing first for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and our foreign policy decision making, but the bureaucratic side. But then I would request you to also say that that Bangladesh will be having a new political leadership in future. So for the future leadership, how they should or what they should do to make it significant changes, meaningful changes in the areas of inclusivity in the foreign policies, particularly in the context of WPS and YPS. First, for our bureaucrats, because they are also part of the policy-making sphere, and then for other future leadership.
I think for the bureaucracy, it is important to prioritize and look at our own strengths, where our strengths lie. So our strengths do not lie in the military power. Our strengths lie in our people, in our culture. And our people, where women and youth, they constitute a very significant part. And countries like us, with our, the kinds of variables that we have, I mean, the challenges that we face, their migration is very important. Then climate is very important. Life skills are very important.
Right.
Employment is, these are very important. And if you prioritize these, then these are people-centric or human security-centric foreign policy. This is something where one should look at and, prioritizing. And then we can, become champions of survivability instead of destruction.
Exactly.
We can how do you want to place yourself as survivors, or champions of humanity, or or a power which is much more destructive or hegemonic. So I think we have to look at our strengths.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you
This is an amazing conversation, and I've learned a lot. I'm sure that those who will be watching it will also get a lot of insights about the critical issues that we often do not talk about, except the wars and conflicts, and those are the quote unquote interesting issues. But as you have mentioned quite rightly, that this is also very critical, and we should not be trapped within just the so-called hard and soft, or critical, non-critical issues. Thank you once again, Prof.
Thank
Amena
you.
Mohsin. Thank you. Dear viewers and audience, we are delighted to have Prof. Amena Mohsin, who has already talked about the issues of inclusivity in foreign policy, particularly in the context of women, peace and security, and youth, peace and security. We also thank Fedikebari Stiftung Bangladesh for organizing this podcast on Bangladesh's foreign policy emerging narratives for us. Thank you so much.